All righty then. I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody while I just kind of read off a couple of general housekeeping rules. Appreciate you joining us and bearing with us. Good evening and welcome to the remote access edition of the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency's March Board of Directors meeting. From those joining us, my name and my voice is that of Nick Wallace. I am the board clerk and the meeting coordinator for this event. Now, before the chair takes over here and calls us to order formally, I'd just like to go over a couple of general housekeeping rules and notifications for those joining us this evening. Now, first and foremost, we are conducting this meeting in a format that complies with Governor Newsom's Executive Order N-29-20. Full text of that order is posted on the homepage of the SMGWA website for your reference should you so choose. Now, for those attending via computer, as we've said a couple of times already, please be sure to mute your microphone when not speaking. Now, this can be done by mousing over the screen and clicking on the microphone icon so that it turns red. On the same note there, I am able to mute any and all participants, and I may do so to avoid meeting interference. If somebody comes up here with excessive background noise that's disruptive, just as a matter of being able to keep things rolling here, I may mute you for that reason. For the board members attending in a voting capacity, all votes tonight are going to be done by roll call. That roll call is going to be done by me upon prompting from the chair. Now, please wait for your name to be called before stating your vote. The board chair and facilitator, that's Chris Perry and Dave Sepos, are going to be moderating the pace of tonight's events and the pace of tonight's meeting, and they will be facilitating all comments and questions. All attendees joining via computer are asked to use the chat tool. You should see a little chat bubble there to get in the queue for questions. Now, if you have a question, go ahead and use that chat tool and just type chat or question or comment. That's all you got to do. We'll call on you sequentially. For those joining in, we will be checking with you periodically as well for those comments. Lastly, if you are a member of the public calling in with us tonight, please be advised that you do not have a legal obligation here to identify yourself when making a comment. Now, with this in mind, we do ask that you consider introducing yourself to assist in maintaining a clear record of this meeting. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to the board chair, Chris Perry. Director Perry, my comments are complete, and I'm going to unmute you here in just a moment.
Okay, thank you. So let's call this meeting to order, and can we get a roll call?
Yes, you can. I'm going to unmute all, so let's see how this works. All right. So now, Dr. Director Engfer, are you there, sir?
Yes, present.
All right, Director Leopold.
Here.
Director McPherson.
Here.
Director Cassidy.
Virtually present.
Director Franklin.
Here.
Director Pollock.
Here.
Director Dillis.
I'm here.
Director Ferris.
Here.
Director Henry.
Here.
Director Stiles.
Here.
Director Perry.
Here.
Now, for the alternates, I see that we're full up on our primaries. I understand that all alternates tonight will be attending in a non-voting capacity. Mr. Baskin, are you here? Director Brown. Director Koopman.
Here.
Director Hayes. Director Lind.
Here.
Director Moran.
Present.
Director Eckwall.
Present.
All right. Director Perry, we have quorum.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick. Do we have any additions or deletions to the regular agenda?
None from staff.
Okay, Now here comes a fun part. Do we have any oral communications from anyone in the public on matters not on the agenda? Nick, I'm leaving this up to you to let me know when we reasonably will have heard.
I'm not seeing any indications that any callers tonight are wishing to speak at this point. If I'm mistaken in this, please feel free to correct me. I'm speaking to all our callers. If not, let's just, well, hold on. Yeah, at this point, I believe that no members of the public wish to comment based on the silence.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Okay, now can I get approval of the minutes from the February 27th meeting?
I move approval. Commissioner Ingfer seconds.
Okay, any discussion? Any comment from the public? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, do a roll call vote. Nick, would you call a roll, please?
All righty, before I do the roll call, could I ask who initially motioned for that?
John Leopold.
Director Leopold, annotated. All right. Director Engfer,
Aye.
Director Leopold,
Aye.
Director McPherson,
Aye.
Director Cassidy,
Aye.
Director Franklin,
Aye.
Director Pollock,
Aye.
Director Dillis,
Yes.
Director Ferris,
Aye.
Director Henry,
Aye.
Director Stiles,
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Chair Perry.
Aye.
I show 10 ayes and 1 abstain. Motion passes.
Okay, 2.2, we'd like to acknowledge the appointment of Bill Eckwall, Director from the Scotts Valley Water District, as an alternate director to the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay. All right. Nothing on the consent agenda, I see. So that gets us down to 4.1, our groundwater sustainability technical consultant contract amendment. This is an amendment that was in our packet, and I think we're going to give this to John Ricker to talk a little more about, or start. Is that the staff person that's going to give us a narrative here?
Yeah, that would be correct.
Okay, John.
That's fine. Sure. There's an explanation and there's a memo from Perrette and I in the agenda packet, and also a backup letter from Montgomery. Basically, they are asking for additional funds to complete the groundwater model update. As you know, we did have an existing groundwater model, but there were a number of things that needed to be done to modify and update that model to have it meet the Sigma requirements. Not the least of which were a number of things involved with extending the model out to accommodate the new basin boundaries, both on the east side going over to the mid-county agency, and then also on the west side crossing the San Lorenzo River, crossing the Ben Lomond Fault, and picking up an area that's a different geology. So a lot of work has needed to be done with updating that model. It was more than the original contract provided for. But we believe that the request is reasonable and necessary, and it's still within the range of the cost estimates that were originally made for updating the model. So we would recommend that your board go ahead approve that contract increase to make sure we have a good functional model for our basin. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, questions? So now if you have a question, you're supposed to message in, right? Okay. I'll wait a second more for any messages. Okay.
Chris, this is Dave. Can you hear me?
Dave, yes.
I just want to remind everybody, as Nick had identified, in order to make sure that you are in the queue, if you are using the online method, you would go to the chat box, which is that little cartoon bubble icon. You only need to type in where it says enter your message. You just only need to type in comment or question. That's all you need to write one of those words. Don't change the override that goes to everyone, and that's how we'll know who's in the queue. So, and then periodically we would check in with people who are not online and who are only on the phone. So somebody needs to, so for instance, Doug Engford just did so. So that's how we'll know that you're in the queue, folks.
Okay. Doug?
Thanks. So I guess, John, I had two questions. The first one I think is probably the easiest one. Just wanted to understand how the 108 that we're talking about here interacts with the 48,990 back from May. I assume that this is additive to that 49K.
Yes, that would be additive. The 49K was really to work on the groundwater dependent ecosystems and the surface water interactions, doing a number of mostly field work, getting out there and trying to map and better assess those interactions. This is really just for the modeling effort. So those two are indeed additive.
Okay, thanks for that. Second question, I don't know if this is going to be for you or for Red, or maybe, I don't know if Sierra's on or not, but just wanted for review purposes to get clear on the Prop 1 grant, the formula for grant coverage, and if there's any remaining unused grant capacity at this point, or if we, with this budget, are we maxing out our ability to draw on that grant?
My understanding is that we have been able to pull the full amount that we are eligible for. So the grant will help us with this, but we can't go back and ask for more unless Perrette knows something more than I do.
We already knew that potentially we are going over with the modeling task, and we included some of this overage as part of our request, our budget for the grant round 3. So it's already partially in here.
Thank you.
And I think Jack had a question.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering if we anticipate the need to increase this agreement, the budget for this agreement anymore, based on what we know.
I can take that. Not for the model. That should get us there unless the board desires to do more model runs as we get into the project management and the actions. And every time we do that, there's additional time involved. So that could be something that the board chooses to add on as a change order. And there might be other areas of the GSP that could make us to come back and ask for a new change order. But at this point, we're not aware, the staff is not aware of anything.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, is there anything from the public? Nick, I'll depend on you to.
All right, at this time, I'm not seeing any of the folks calling in, trying to talk. I'm going to give it about 5 more seconds. If anybody has a comment, they're obviously welcome to share, but it's looking like nobody has anything to say.
Okay, is there any more discussion from the board? Okay, let's
This is
hear.
Bruce. Move the recommended action.
Yes, can I have a motion?
From Bruce.
Bruce?
And Ruth, I'll second it.
Okay. Any other discussion? And someone's coming in with a question here.
Now, I understand that Director Cassidy seconded the motion. I am unclear as to who initially moved this item.
I think it was Bruce McPherson.
Correct.
All right.
Would you do a roll call vote, Nick?
Yes, sir, I can. One moment. All right, Director Burr,
Yes.
Director Leopold,
Yes.
Director McPherson,
Yes.
Director Cassidy,
Yes.
Director Franklin,
Yes.
Director Pollock,
Yes.
Director Dillis,
Yes.
Director Ferris, Director Ferris, Director Henry,
Yes.
Director Stiles,
Yes.
Director Perry.
Yes.
All right, I have 10 ayes and 1 absent. It seems that the motion passes.
And let me just interject, was there anyone from the public that was trying to speak during that? I saw something pop up on my screen. Okay.
I have something. This is Parat Harman. Did I hear that we did not get an aye from Director Ferris?
We didn't get a response of any kind.
This specific action requires a vote of 6 member agency representatives, all ayes. So at this point, we have not received that.
Is Director Ferris with us?
I am checking. One moment. Looks like he is. However, there may be some technical issues on his end. It says is not connected to audio. Let's ping him. Let's see if that works.
You may want to give out your cell phone number or remind people about your cell phone number.
Yeah. One moment, all. Right. And again, just as an admin note for the directors here, in case anybody's trying to reach me individually, I did send out my personal cell phone in an email earlier today. It should have gone out to all of you folks. All right, Director Perry, I think that the best way to go about this is if I boot him from the chat. That will indicate him obviously that something is amiss and probably prompt him to come back on.
Okay.
Shall I do that, sir?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I move we continue this item until Director Ferris is back on.
Let's give it a minute and see if we can get him back on here. He just got booted off. Because we want him on here for anything else we do.
I would also like to take this opportunity to remind the board that we do have Director Moran present as well as an alternate.
Can we call Lou by phone?
Let me see one moment. I think I actually do have this phone number here.
Clearly an important part of the meeting in general.
The phone number I have for him is going to be the front desk of SLV Water. I do not have his individual contact, unfortunately.
Oh, Lou is back.
Nick, this is Rick. I'm calling him now.
So he's back in the meeting.
Right, and again, from an admin standpoint here, I want to apologize for folks. This is just, again, this is our first run through doing this, so this is the kind of teething problems that we may expect, but we are working through it, and we should have this resolved shortly.
Looks like he's on. He's not muted now. Lou, are you there?
Lou, can you hear us, buddy?
Yes, I am. Thank you. For some reason, it just froze up. Yes,
Okay.
I'm here.
Excellent. So did you hear everything that was going on prior to your vanishment?
No, it just locked up and nothing was happening. So I just reinitialized.
Okay. Did you hear the presentation from staff regarding the first item, 4.1?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yes, I did.
Okay. So at this time, we're ready for your vote.
Aye.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Lou. All right.
I have him annotated as aye. That is 11 for 11.
Okay. Way to go. Okay. Next item is go to there you go. Informational session, groundwater sustainability plan. The roadmap is just up there because we always have it up there. I'm sure everyone looks at it. I guess I should be fair and just ask if the members of the public have anything to say about the 4.2.1, the GSP roadmap. Okay, I'm going to move on.
Can you hear me? Chris, it's Georgina. I'm not public, but I do want to say something about it.
Yes, please.
So because of what's happening here, I have had to shuffle things a little bit on the roadmap. So you'll see if you compare to last month, there is a little bit of shuffling. So we don't want things to slow down very much because of everything becoming virtual, but there were some things we took off the meeting today so that we could kind of take a bite of easier things whilst we learn to use this technology all together. So that's just something to bear in mind, that our schedule is hit a little road bump, but I'm confident we'll still make it.
Okay, thank you, Georgina. Anybody else? Okay, then I'm going to move to 4.2.2, sustainable management criteria, groundwater levels and groundwater quality, water demand forecasting. Dorette has a presentation.
It will take a few moments when I will hopefully have the presenting right. So hang in there. But welcome.
Brett, can I, while you are getting ready, can I go over just a couple of facilitation items in addition to things that Nick has already covered, please?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. Hey everybody, it's Dave. So a couple things. First off, I apologize. I've had a really bad bug, so if I cough, I'll try to keep myself silenced. I want to remind everybody of a couple of things as we go into this process. I'll be facilitating this portion, so I just want to cover a few things. With Parette's presentation, we're going to go start to finish, and then we're going to go ahead and field questions after her presentation is done. So as you have seen already using the chat feature, if you wish to get into the queue, you can do so at any time. We won't call on you until we get to the completion of Paret's entire presentation, but we'll then have the entire queue in front of me to then call on folks. I'll facilitate exactly as I do when I'm in the room with you all, which is to say that I'll be looking first to the board and exhausting all comments and questions that the board has first. And upon concluding and making sure that that's the case, then we'll open up the floor to the public. And just as has already been done this evening, I'll open the floor and see if folks want to speak. Anybody that is online and is a member of the public, you can similarly get in queue thereafter. I ask frankly for members of the public, please do not get into the queue. Do not enter that you have a comment or question in the chat box until we have completely gotten done with the board. Please don't do that. Okay, I'm just asking you. This is, going back to some things that Nick has said at the outset, and it was in an email that got sent out. Everybody is learning new systems here. We've just experienced them. We know in advance that they're frustrating. We know it takes more time. But I can tell you that if we're trying to efficiently facilitate a conversation where we're getting through all the comments and questions by the board and randomly a public comment pops up, it's going to be very difficult for us to know where that's coming from. I promise, as I always do, I will then open the floor for the public. Just please wait for me to make that call. If you're on a phone call and you're not online and you can't use the chat feature, we'll absolutely make accommodations, as has already been done. I will be trying to move things along pretty swiftly, so when I get to the point where I'm opening the floor for the public, I will remind everybody to unmute themselves, but then I'm going to move pretty quickly. And if I don't hear somebody say, hi, this is so-and-so, I've got a question, I'm just going to move us along. When we get to Georgina's presentation, because of the length and some of the complexity, we're going to pause along the way, so there'll be slides, and we'll get to those, and you'll see that there'll be a slide prompt, which will basically, we'll pause, we'll open up the floor for questions. I'm going to pause for public comment between between Paret's presentation and Georgina's, and then I'm going to sort of call an audible when we get into Georgina's presentation. If the conversations between each one of the subsections of Georgina's presentation I feel are going long, I will open up the floor for the public at that time, because I don't want to have the public have to sit for too long of a time to ask a question, but I'm going to gauge that a little bit by ear. Just one other thing for those of you online that are in the system, you can unmute yourself by either just moving your cursor over the mic button. You can also, if you want to test this, you can actually do the same, which is also going to mute and unmute yourself. So just be aware that there's a couple of ways to quickly do that. With that, I think that's all I had to say, just to get everybody grounded in facilitation approach. So sorry about that, Paret, but it's all your show.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening, all. This is really exciting. I think we are the pioneers, or at least the first truly only remotely accessed public meeting in Santa Cruz County. Many of you have, who are coming from different agencies, you've done partially digital, partially on site, and hopefully this goes on without a hitch. But thanks we have 31 participants total, so thanks for everybody who is spending the evening with us. So this is about, okay, well, okay, let me see, my controls are going back. Here we go. So this is about water demand. We're not going to, I'm not going to get to that level of detail to actually determining what numbers we will be using, what population numbers, and what gallons, acre feet we're going to be using in the GSP, but it's building a foundation for that, letting us to realize or maybe have a better understanding how complex the forecasting is. And as we've heard before, nothing is simple here. So hopefully we will all walk away with with that information. So I'm starting with a big picture. It's the state water use in California. Only 10% of the total water consumption in the state is urban, as much as we kind of realize, because we live in a more urbanized area, that development is driving it. Not so much. It does have indirect because the 40% agricultural use that is also driven by people who need to eat. So half of that combined is from a human activity, but the other half, a full half of that is for environmental uses. And environmental uses, I'll kind of spend a little bit more time on that. So environmental water use falls into 4 categories. One is water in rivers, protected as wild and scenic under federal and state laws. Second is water required for maintaining habitat within streams. The third category is water that supports wetlands within wildlife preserves. And fourth one is water needed to maintain water quality for agricultural and urban use. Half of that, the 50% of environmental use occurs in rivers along the state's north coast. And then the agricultural, that gets sometimes a bad rap too, but it is something that agriculture has, farming industry has been very much focused on being efficient use and keeps doing that. So it changes a lot. The need for how much water gets used varies drastically between wet and dry years. So the 10% urban, again, if you just put that in perspective, the people have actually most ability to cut back. Agricultural and environment, the impacts of a dry year or consecutive dry years is much more significant. And you see from the next slide how drastic that is. So I think I'll go ahead. So this one now is, there's a couple of things here. It actually shows the 2 circular graphs to the right. Shows the difference between wet year and dry year. So 2006 is the one picked here. 104 million acre feet is total that was water use in that wet year, and in dry year it didn't quite drop to half, but pretty close to that, 61 million acre feet. So you can kind of see we're not talking about percentage points of 10 or 15. This is truly a big swing. And then you also see the different areas of the state, how varied it is where the water gets used between environment, agriculture, and urban. And the bars are also representative of total uses between those regions. So another one from state, and then we're coming closer to home. So this is more of a historical perspective. This graph starts with 1960. So we have 55 years on this graph. The big area gray in the back is population. So the state population, as we all know, has grown from about 15 million in 1960 to close to 40 here. So that has not quite tripled, but 2.5 times. And then the respective water uses are the line graphs. The urban use is in the bottom, the beige one. So we are maybe from 3 to 6. So we have doubled. So that kind of puts things in perspective. And above it, you see the agricultural use also. It is about the same that it was 55 years ago. And we have 2.5 times more people. And we're not only producing food for our own people, but we are a powerhouse that feeds most of the nation and world in many different crops. So the total use is the blue line, and you see that it's pretty much flat over those 55 years if you look at the starting point and ending point. So we're in Santa Cruz County now, because we don't really have the big agriculture here. We do have a small share that mainly in central and northern county that goes to farming. So ours is mainly urban, but you know, very, very interesting trend. So we have the light gray line there is population. It is actually a number of connections. So I use that because county had this this chart available, and it goes, the number of connection has gone from about 50,000 to 66,000. So that is, let me tell you, that's a 30%. So now the time, 30% growth, and the timeline we're looking here is from 84 to 2019. So the population, actually, I pulled up the population in 1984 was 205,000 in the county, and now it's 275,000. So the population in this time frame has increased 34%, slightly more than the number of connections has gone up. And then if you look at the production, that has, we were at 27,000 acre feet in 1984, and now we are about 22,000 acre feet. So it's a drop of 19%. So obviously those two things are not moving hand in hand. So this is municipal only, and we are, as I said, 22,000 acre feet. In addition to that, we have private use, private water use in the county is about 4,000 total, and ag users, and it's the big bulk of that is in Pajaro Valley and South County, it's 25,000. So our total countywide water use today is about 50,000 acre feet. So now coming even closer to that, so we have Santa Cruz Water Department, San Lorenzo Valley Water District, and Scotts Valley Water District here on this chart. Just some numbers for you to kind of take home with yourself. The same time period, 1984 to 2019. Number of counts for Santa Cruz has increased 21%. Annual demand in the same time frame has dropped 30%. So we have like 50% margin there between those two. San Lorenzo Valley Water District, number of counts has gone up 44%, and annual demand has increased only 5%. Not quite 50% margin, but very similar trend. And for Scotts Valley Water District, we have increased the number of accounts 84%, and our annual demand has gone up 36%. This is if we take into consideration, that's a total annual demand. That includes potable and recycled water for 2019. In 1984, there was no recycled water as a supply. So if we take that out, the potable has gone up only 17%. So again, we're looking at very different trends there. See, so kind of now moving away from numbers for a little bit, demand and capacity. When we talk about do we have capacity to meet the demand, the capacity means a lot of different things for different people. Coming from water management standpoint, water utility standpoint, there's supply capacity and there's system capacity. And so if we talk about system capacity, that's one thing, is do we need to build, construct additional pipelines, treatment facilities, pump stations, reservoirs, or can the existing system capacity satisfy added demand? So because for all of us, our demand has gone down so much. Most of our infrastructure was built with in the times that it met much higher demands. So by and large, all of our systems have sufficient capacity to meet today's needs, today's demands, and future demands as well. It's all getting old. It needs to be replaced, but it would that would be true if we didn't see any increase in demand. We would still have to deal with replacement and repair of the existing systems. And the other piece of that is supply capacity, because we are kind of closed system in this county. We don't get any imported water. We are on our own. We're looking at all of those different supply sources that go into the mix. Not all of us have access to all of it, but collectively as a region, we're looking at groundwater, recycled water, supplemental water. Those are the new potential projects and management actions we are going to be talking about later. Processed water, that doesn't get talked about often. We all, the water suppliers, we need some water. We use some water in the process of treating it from the source to the potable level. And so that's another place that we can always look for improvements and efficiencies. Is a way to use that water more efficiently and put that water to better use, either for beneficial uses or just leave it as a source water. Unaccounted for water is another industry term. That's water that between when it leaves the treatment plant and when it actually moves through the customer's meter, there is a certain amount of water that gets lost. So we don't know really what happens to that. That's why it's not really called loss. It's unaccounted for, and there is multiple reasons or where it could go. And by and large here, it's about 10% of the total water that gets produced never gets delivered or metered and billed through the customer. So that's another thing that utilities are always looking for. How can we do better there? How can we reduce the 10% to 9 or 7 or 5? And if we look at aggregate gallons or acre feet that get lost as an unaccounted for water, again, we can put it to better use. And then water use efficiencies, we all know that. This Sigma and the GSP and the requirements that we're going to be writing into this report is not the only guideline or requirement we have to, the municipal utilities have to follow. There's a lot of planning tools, and there is more and more. Not every year, every 5 years, something new comes down from the state, and we have to comply with that. So urban water management plans, they've been in place for about 20 years now. All municipal, all public utilities that serve more than 3,000 accounts have to have them. They get updated every 5 years, and and they have to include demand projections for next 20 years. So that is a tool that we have been using and we continue to use, and you will see in the upcoming slides how wrong we have been every time when we open up the 5-year planning, next 20-year planning horizons, that our projections are not as accurate as we would like to see them. So the next one here, Senate Bill 606 and Assembly Bill 1668, is relatively new. This is a statewide mandate. It is something that will be gradually implemented over the next few years, but water suppliers have to prepare another annual report starting in 2023, and there are very specific guidelines in their targets that we have to meet. It is now sliced and diced to much more detailed level. We have to come up with state actually gives us residential indoor use targets. Then there's going to be residential outdoor use targets, and CII, commercial, industrial, institutional use is going to get its own targets. Water loss is going to get its own targets, and then we add them all together. And if we're out of compliance, we have to show the state how we're going to get into compliance. On top of that, California Water Plan 2018 update, 19 recommended actions, 6 sustainability goals, and the most recent one is Governor's Water Resilience Portfolio. And so what that did is, or what it does, it directs to think more strategically about assessing current water supplies, the health of waterways, future demands as the climate change continues to threaten the state's water infrastructure and reliability. So back to the numbers. So I know all of you are like, so what's the magic? How can we, how do we know how much water people and people will be needing here, using here in our county? So the very classic approach, and that's the one I alluded to a couple of slides back, that's typically what we have been doing in our urban water management plans. We take the current use, current demand, and then we go into land use documents. We work with cities here and county and look for their projections, what are typically in the general plans in the next every 5-year increments for the next 20 years. AMBAG is another resource. We look at what AMBAG is projecting, and then we take that data, and because people really don't matter for us, what matter is gallons. So there is different ways of assigning water use targets or allocations for each customer group: residentials, single-family residential, multi-family residential, commercial. So we multiply those two, how many new people, how many new households, and what we know about what the average use is, and then we add it to the current baseline. And so you can see on this chart, we did that. So we took 2015, when this chart was made, we took where we were then, and those are, now we're down to this basin. So this is this basin specific chart. So City of Santa Cruz is not part of this. So we took what we knew then, and we have Scotts Valley here, San Lorenzo Valley and Mount Vernon, private production, and then a little bit of industrial remediation pumping. And so we added what we know about the projected demand into it, and we get the blue and green bars slightly growing over the next 20 years. So that's taking into consideration the growth. So it kind of hasn't really worked this way, as you remember from the previous ones, previous charts. And it's almost anecdotal, but I pulled our first Scotts Valley Water District did their first urban water management plan in 1998. And we projected the demand in 2010 to be 726 million gallons a year. So we're in 2020 and ours is 365. So in our urban water management plan, we thought we're going to be using, and we didn't think, we used this classic approach. We took from AMBAG and City General Plan what they thought was in the pipeline. We allocated the gallons to each household, and we came up with this number. And it was very scientific, and it was very wrong. So we have done the same over and over. We did 2005 urban water management plan. We projected the demand for 2020, and it was supposed to be 580 million gallons. We are at 365. So we are getting closer, but we have not done a very good job projecting. If I was to do budgets using that kind of error, I probably would lose my job pretty quickly. And it's not just us. I also looked up Santa Cruz Water Department's 2010 urban water management plan was what I could easily get my hands on. So in 2010, they projected the demand for 2025. And they had two scenarios. They did more conservative, less conservative. And it was supposed to be in the more, it was 1,445 million gallons a year was one, and the other was 1,200 86 million gallons a year. And where are we today with this? It is 26. So we are about, doing the math, from acre feet to million gallons. So 2,600 acre feet per year, that is 900 million gallons. So again, we are so missing the mark on this. So why? And that kind of explains why. Our fallacy in all of those is we always anticipated or expected or took for granted that nothing happens to the baseline, that the baseline stays where it is. So that is the biggest area that is hard to predict, and because there's too many influences. So there's 6 that are called out here. It's economics. We've seen that as we go through recessions, that has impact on the water demand. Sometimes it's good, positive, sometimes it's negative. The political, land use laws, ADUs, which just came through, laws like that. Technology, the plumbing code, the fixtures in the house, that's been big driving force in the last 10, 15 years, why indoor demands just keep dropping. Outdoor, I think we have a long way to go still. The technology that is being now implemented and sold for outdoor irrigation is still quite at the beginning phases. Environment, that's the big one. The climate change. It is, we would love to get average years. There is no average years anymore. So it's bad for us from being able to do accurate predicting if it's very wet year because people use less water, and it's bad for us if it's very dry year because people are told or asked to use less water. And then of course laws and social, our habits, our how people view value of water. That is something that is really, really difficult to put numbers to. Is it all going to change 10%, 5%, 1%? So that is the challenge for water management piece. Is the new demand. It's easy. I can give you bookends, and we have not really missed the mark there. But with existing demand, that is a big question mark for all of us. So I think this is now actually, Georgina, your slide, if you want to maybe jump in here and kind of help to reveal how we're going to take those question marks and make it part of the model.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Perrette. So yes, we have to model predictively out at least, first 20 years, but then we have to add another 30 years onto that. So it's actually a 50-year extension. So the predictive part of the model will end about 2068. And this is a requirement of planning, and it's the only tool we have to see the projects and management actions that are implemented as part of the GSP. What do those do for groundwater levels? And part of the predictive scenario, you have to take into account climate change and the forecasted water demand that Perrette was talking about. We still have to come up with those numbers. In other GSPs, they've used the urban water management plans, and you can see those are off already, but it's a kind of a worst case. So it's better if it's if it's more than what it's going to be. It'd be worse if you were underestimated. And then we also take into account projects and management actions. Obviously, that's part of one of the main parts of the predictive scenarios. That's why we're really doing it, to see what effects those would have on the basin. So you've heard from Sean from Balance on climate change. We have a sub-consultant, water systems consulting, who will be talking about they will eventually be talking to you about the forecasted water demand, but they're going to be doing some work with the agencies to figure out what to put in the model for this water demand. So Perrette talked about her presentation wasn't including numbers, but eventually we do have to get to numbers. So you'll hear about it again then. Okay.
All right. I believe that is our last content slide, if I'm not mistaken. Perrette, if you want to, I think your last slide is just really your content info, correct?
Yeah, that's the end of mine. So I'll leave the slides up so we can use them if anybody wants to refer back. There's big numbers on the slides, and also the slides that are available on Santa Margarita Groundwater website has the same numbering scheme.
Right. So I was actually going to point that out. I meant to do that at the outset. That'll be helpful both in this presentation and in Georgina's to rapidly orient ourselves to questions if people take a note of and maybe jot down the slide number so we can quickly do that. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for comments or questions from the board. At this time, I do not see anybody in the queue. So, oh, there we go. So let's go ahead and go to Doug Enfer, please. Doug, go please.
Thanks. Perrette, just to try to orient me here, I'm comparing the numbers on slides 6 and 9, and I'm thinking maybe the colors are just inverted, but because on 6 it looks like San Lorenzo Valley produces, I don't know, 5 times as much water as you guys do. But then on the bar charts, Scotts Valley looks way bigger than San Lorenzo Valley plus Mount Herman.
The bar chart has only groundwater, I believe, and this one has the San Lorenzo Valley Water District groundwater and surface water use combined.
Oh, that's very helpful. Okay, thank you.
All right, I have my Bruce. Doug, that was it for you. Is that correct? Okay,
yeah,
we'll move on to Jack. Jack, go ahead, please.
Okay, I have a question about slide 7, the so-called unaccounted for water. And I've heard about this over the years, but it has always mystified me a bit. I'm just trying to get my arms around not so much the reasons, because it sounds like it's unaccounted for, but more kind of the consistency. So I'm wondering if we tend to have unaccounted for water that's kind of the same amount every year, or if that unaccounted amount is volatile, and then how that compares to, say, other areas outside of our area. Is this a typical kind of an unaccounted for water amount? Any way to talk about that?
Can we advance the slide? You said it was to slide 7, correct, Jack?
Correct. And all it does is just have the words unaccounted for.
Okay.
Yeah, oh, okay. It is pretty consistent for us. I mean, it moves a little bit. You know, it's between 9 and 10 on average. It is, I believe, I've been told that on East Coast, they can get to 30% is unaccounted for. So it's the age of the system is the biggest thing. It is some leakage that happens, and the older the system and the harder to get to it. That's the big driving force. Other things that impact is, for example, high pressure. So again, that is something that is state has now is turning a lot of attention to pressures in the different, for each utility we have to start reporting and improving with that. Meters underread. That's another thing that we know, that as meters, the mechanical parts of them for those systems that use those meters, as they get older, they tend to underread a little bit, let a little bit water go through. So those are the typical known causes.
Okay, so just a follow-up question. So I'm just wondering if there's any investment that could be made to counteract that. I guess we will replace the meters periodically, so it sounds like we'll catch up on that. But if it's leaking pipes, And I remember the worst, I guess, I remember hearing about the wooden water pipes in Santa Cruz after the earthquake, that it was leaking like a sieve, and we're still there in 1989. But I'm wondering, is it worth a capital investment to replace our pipes to stop leaking water if that is the issue?
It's never going to be zero, but yes, I think all of the utilities, that is something that we are looking for, kind of trying to balance off the benefit and the cost of that, and to determine, because they're invisible. It's really hard to. It's not just age. There's a lot of things, and there are many startups now that are looking at this and offering the services to try to estimate the most critical areas of the system that you would get most bang for the buck by pulling it out or replacing the pipes from there. But it's not cheap. Mile of a pipe is about $1 million, and
That's a lot of money.
that's a lot of money. Yes.
And we have paid for leak assessments over the years, and our system is remarkably tight and not full of leaks. So it's more just unaccounted for on some level. It's weird. But Mike, I had one question, since I don't see anyone else in the queue. One thing that's interesting I'll put it in the water use efficiency category, the amount of water that is lost to leaks that we know about after the meter on individuals' property. We have a leak adjustment program, so we know just by people coming in asking for an adjustment on their bill because they had a leak. What did we get, like 4 million gallons last year of leaks that were asked, to be adjusted?
7
million gallons. So, just people with their own personal plumbing or irrigation that's leaking, and those are only the ones we know about. So there could be way more where people don't even either know or go through the trouble of asking for a leak adjustment. So that always blows my mind. So that's just an aside. Personal responsibility on keeping individual water systems tight.
Okay, are there any other comments from members of the board, either through the chat method, which I do not see, or I don't think that we have any members of the board that are.
This is Bruce.
Yeah, go ahead, Bruce. That's correct. You're on phone only.
Go ahead, Bruce. Yeah, is our limits on water development? This is it's a interrelated question, I guess. Is our limits on water development and what we need to do or maintain going to impact what the state wants us to do in relation to housing? Or what's the indication of how that's going to mix? That water is a key component of how we survive, of course. So, and the state's going to be pounding a lot of housing, growth limits on us. How much is this water development? Do you see it coming into play as far as the state sees what we should do as a region for building housing? Is there any indication of that?
Yes, I think we have pretty much in all our urban water management plans, all 3 agencies that are part of this. I'm looking for my numbers if I have them here. So San Lorenzo, Santa Cruz, and Scotts Valley, we are using the AMVAG and local jurisdictions, land use jurisdiction numbers. So we are planning to grow according, and we're planning to meet those demands. And those are, I think, Santa Cruz is maybe 17% increase in the population in the next 20 years. I think that was the numbers from the urban water management plan. And for San Lorenzo, I have that number. Let me look for San Lorenzo. Okay. So yeah, Santa Cruz it's in the urban water management plan. By 2035, They have 17,000 more people they're serving. Scotts Valley Water District, we are serving 1,700 more people, and San Lorenzo Valley Water District, also 1,700 more people. That's from the 2015 urban water management plans. So if I just take that incremental demand, that is something I believe we can deal with, because that's so easy to predict and calculate, and all of those are in the magnitude of 5 to 10% more increased demand than we are seeing now. The big unknown is still is the 100% what we are, the customers we are serving now. What is their behavior? What are they going to do? Are they going to be using 10% less? Are they going to be using 10% more? Is it going to be 20%, 20% more? So those are the big variables. And then, of course, the climate change. What is that going to do to the supply? I'm going to go really quickly back to this slide. I did not talk about what was the background here. This one. So here on this slide, I am showing for the Scotts Valley Water District, it is slide 9, demand forecasting classic approach. So on this one, over the next 25 years, we have added those 1,700 extra people in here. And as you see, the blue bar just very slightly increases. So what's in the back there is the area in the back, the beige area, the mountains, if you will. This is the kind of a depicted recharge to the basin. Those are the type of movements that is very different scale. So this is from 2015 and earlier, it's the actual rainfall patterns that we've seen. And then from 2015 forward, I just went and kind of took the same pattern and said, well, assuming that we will see exactly the same pattern that happened over the last 40 years, that it will repeat again. This is the variability. And as you can see there, the recharge goes from, it drops 30%, it drops 40%, and then it goes up again another 20. So those are the variabilities that is really hard with considering how little storage we have here in our county, that we really have to, this is the main thing. I don't see the housing, the mandates that come from trying to balance the housing in the state, that being as big of a challenge than the climate change challenges and the relative shortage of storage, that we can't be putting all that in a wet year somewhere to be used over the 5-year drought. We don't have that kind of capacity currently.
Okay. Yeah, it's going to be a tough.
Did that get your question then?
Can this is Rosemary. I'd like to just add a couple of things to the comments that Brett just made, which I agree with. The nuance I'd like to sort of lay out is that in the 2015 urban water management plan that the city of Santa Cruz did, as Brett said, we estimated 15% more population, but our demand is flat, was projected to be flat and slightly declining, in spite of the fact that those new people were coming in. And it has to do with 3 things. One is building and plumbing codes that require more efficient fixtures and development and less commercial and even multifamily kinds of irrigation, less landscaping, that certainly turf in particular. The second part was price elasticity of demand. Our rates are going up, and that is and has actually, we've seen in the last 5 years, it affects how people are using water in our system. And the third thing is programmatic conservation that's very targeted to providing cost-effective investments in solutions that shape the demand curve and what have you. So these factors are keeping demand flat, even with growing population that we would be serving. And for us, as Brett said, and really for the region, it's part of the big question has to do with, do we have enough storage to get ourselves into drought? And that's a problem whether we grow or we don't grow.
All right, thank you, Rosemary. Corette, is that you that just added in that that note about Scotts Valley, the correction?
Yes, I was mixing up my acre feet and gallons, so I wanted everybody to have the correct numbers that the 2010 Urban Water Management Plan that City of Santa Cruz Water Department did. They projected the demand to be either 4.4 billion gallons a year, or a bit more conservative scenario was 3.9 billion gallons a year by 2025. And last year's was 2.6. So it's just very different scale of they never thought it could drop this low for them.
All right, thank you for that correction. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the board? All right, I'm going to go and we'll open up the floor for members of the public. Again, if you're a member of the public, please do check and make sure if your phone is muted. I'm going to move this along pretty quickly. So members of the public that are not online, does anybody have a question or comment that they would like to make at this time? Checking one more time if anybody's muted. Do you have a question or comment at this time? Okay, hearing none, we're going to proceed on then. So we are now going to move on to the second presentation for the evening by Georgina. So are we shifting that control over, or does Georgina already have organizer control as well, Nick?
I will facilitate that if you could just give me one moment. Hopefully I hit the right buttons for it.
Indeed we will.
Alrighty, Georgina, you should be, emphasis on should be, set up and ready to go.
I don't think so. It says that Scotts Valley Water District is presenting.
It may take a moment on
Okay. Something switched, but not to me yet.
I believe if we could maybe just give this about 15 more seconds. If not, I can pull up the slides on my end and we can just do it that way.
Okay, it says I'm the presenter.
Georgina, I had a small window that popped up and I had to accept being the presenter. So maybe you have one of the many windows you might have open. Is this?
Yeah, it's coming. Yeah, okay. It's quite delayed and okay.
Well, you're far away. You're in Oakland, all the way.
Yes, of course, it takes longer. Whenever I click, it takes a few seconds, apparently. Yeah, it's pretty slow. And so I should apologize in advance. There might be a little bit of a delay from when I click on the slide and when it advances. It could take some time.
Georgina, did you click the button at the bottom of the screen to share your screen?
Yes. It says people can see my screen. Can you see it?
No.
It's just moving very slowly.
Waiting. It actually says waiting for people to see your screen.
All right, I do the slides up on my side here. If you're okay with it, I think it may be prudent to just roll along that way.
Yeah, I recommend that. Is that okay, Georgina? But Nick, just so you know, we're not seeing it on the screen either.
Understood.
While we're waiting to answer the question, since I've been texted a couple of times, my dog's name is Tucker.
All right, Georgina, I'm just pulling it up on mine here. If you just give me a moment. Again, I appreciate you folks bearing with us on this.
It's helpful right now for everybody to keep repeating the phrase, technology is our friend.
Okay, and Georgina, I have you up here. I am on the title slide of the slide deck, and I am ready to proceed.
Okay, well, I can't see it yet, but I'm sure it will come up. Yeah, today I'm going to be talking, continuing our conversation on degraded groundwater quality that we started last month, and when we were talking about significant unreasonable. So we'll be going back to that, and also then going into some new territory on minimum thresholds and measurable objectives, and actually undesirable results as well. Next slide.
On number 2.
So we did, third slide, please. So we did, we took what you had, what we discussed last month, and we came up with a statement of significant unreasonable degraded groundwater quality. And it's quite long, and so I am going to read it for you, but on the next slide, I'm actually going to break it down so it's a little bit more digestible, because it is fairly long, but we try to capture all the sentiments. Go back one, please, Nick. We try to capture all the sentiments that we heard at the meeting. So our proposal is that significant unreasonable water quality conditions occur if Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency projects or management activities cause an increase in the concentration of constituents in groundwater that lead to adverse impacts on beneficial users or uses of groundwater or surface water because of non-compliance with drinking water standards. Adverse impacts include diminished supply or undue cost for mitigating such negative impacts. Okay, so next slide, Nick. And so I'm going to break this down, and I've put in the background the part that we're not going to discuss, well, not discuss it, but I'm going to break it down with this first part in black. And it's significant and unreasonable water quality conditions occur if the agency's projects or management activities cause an increase in the concentrations of constituents in groundwater. I think that was pretty clear from last, when we discussed this last month, that the SGMA requires it to be, the degradation has to be because of activities the agency undertakes to achieve sustainability. You can't, in trying to achieve sustainability, you can't cause an increase or degrade groundwater quality in the basin. Next slide. And that those increases in concentrations lead to adverse impacts on beneficial users or uses of groundwater or surface water because of non-compliance with drinking water standards. That kind of finishes that circle. And then the third, next slide, Nick, is we have, if we left this sentence off, people wouldn't, maybe wouldn't be clear on what adverse impacts might be. And so here we've added diminished supply or undue cost for mitigating such negative impacts. So the diminished supply, obviously, if the water quality is degraded to the point that it's above drinking water standards, you can't use it, so it's diminished supply, or unless you treat it. So there would be these costs for mitigating would probably be treatment or bringing in other water or something like that. So that's what we came up with. And again, I don't think the purpose today is to wordsmith this thing, but to hear from you whether this captures kind of what we had in mind, and we still have to run this also by. There are some board members who are in the individual capacities looking at editorial things, and there might be some tweaks. But in general, we just want to know how you see this statement. And again, it can change. We're not, like, what we say here is not the be all and end all. It can change in the future as well. As we develop the SMCs, we may want to change it a little bit. But this is what we have as a start. Dave?
So we're going to pause here. I'm actually going to ask if we were to go to the next slide, but you don't need to, Nick. This was sort of our cue to pause. I'd actually rather ask Nick if you can go back to the full body text. So I think that would be slide. There we go, slide 3, so that everybody can see that. Again, we're going to use the same method of the chat method to get into the queue, just so we're not stepping on each other's toes too much. Again, I'll just reiterate, as a board, this is where the rubber really starts hitting the road for you all, because this is where the local statement, if you will, of what is significant or reasonable or not, and reflecting that local voice really starts playing a role. So a couple of things. I hear some background noise, so I want to do a couple of things really fast, because I forgot to say this earlier. If you've got 2 devices going at one time, i.e. you're using your phone, but you're also on the online, you want to make sure that one of those is muted. More than likely you're online, so that when you do want to speak, we're not getting a really bad echo, which I've heard a couple times. The other thing too is, conversely, if you've got a secondary device near you, like a cell phone, and you're not using it, please be sure that it is silenced, just as if we were in a live meeting, so that we're not hearing a ringtone in the background, perhaps. With that, I want to go ahead and open up and go to the chat. And again, as I said and Georgina had said, questions, comments. This is the statement. Doesn't mean that it can't change, like Georgina said, but this is the statement that starts asserting where you all are at as a significant unreasonableness statement. So, for instance, I'll just maybe prompt this. If you look down at the last sentence of adverse impacts, including such and such, is that sufficient for you as board members? Are there other impacts that you think might be warranted to be identified that you want to throw out there that staff can then respond to? So I'm going to open up the floor. Any comments or questions at this time? Jack, go ahead.
Yes. Can you remind me what the word constituents means? I know what it means in political circles, but I'm wondering what it means here. And is there a better word, a different word we could use? Because I think it sounds, and I don't know who's going to end up reading this proposal besides the state, but I'd kind of like it to be something that most people could read and understand. So is there a different word to use? And what does constituent mean?
It's the chemistry, the chemicals in the water. So you could say chemical constituents.
Oh.
Would that sound better?
Maybe. Constituents just sounds like I think most people might react to what I did, which, well, are you talking about people in the community or?
Yeah.
I like the word chemicals. I did take chemistry, but I don't remember this word.
Yeah.
It's a thought.
Yeah, we can think about that, but I totally agree with you. It's a very technical term, and that's that working groundwater. It's a common thing, but it's good to point out it's not a layperson term, really.
Okay, thank you.
All right, go ahead, John Ricker. Go ahead, please.
I had to unmute myself. I would suggest that we delete the phrase relating to drinking water standards at this stage. It seems like we get more quantitative later on when we're doing minimum thresholds and objectives. And then there's another reason for that, because we talk about beneficial uses of surface water. We do have a nitrogen TMDL for the San Lorenzo River, which is set at a level much lower than drinking water standards. if we were to say put in inject recycle water, we potentially would increase the nitrogen levels in the river and impact those beneficial uses, even though it's much lower than the drinking water standard. So that would be my recommendation at this stage.
Georgina, from a sort of an accuracy perspective, is there any concern about that?
I have to look into it a little bit more. I don't want to comment, but that's something to, we'll take note of that and look into it a little deeper.
Wait, so John, when you say because we address it later, are you meaning we're addressing it later in this presentation, or it's addressed ultimately later in the to be developed GSP?
It's addressed later in the to be developed GSP that this is sort of a more qualitative statement, whereas when we get to minimum thresholds and management objectives, that's where we tend to get more quantitative and tie it to specific numbers.
Okay. All right, Eden, go ahead, please.
Yeah, if you can hear me, my question or comment is about the use of the term cause, activities cause an increase, as opposed to result in an increase. I'm not quite sure how we would determine that we caused some of these things as opposed to things changed wildly after we did things, but we're not sure exactly why. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does, Georgina. I mean, I don't think that there's a stipulation that there has to be a reference to causation. So that sound reasonable, Georgina?
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh. All right, other questions?
Nick, I just wanted... Sorry, Dave. Nick, are you? Someone's taking notes on these, right?
This meeting is recorded. Yep.
I'm taking notes too, Georgina.
Oh, that's right, correct. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments from members of the board? All right, I think for expediency purposes, I will go ahead and check in with the public at this point in time. Are there any comments from members of the public? If so, please unmute your phone at this time and make your statement. Checking in. Any members of the public? Okay, hearing none, we're going to go ahead and proceed on. So, Nick, if you could advance us on to slide 6, I believe it is.
Yeah, I can do that. I am seeing one additional one from Director Stiles, however. I just want to point that out.
You're seeing an additional comment from Director Stiles?
I believe that she wishes to comment. Yep.
Jack, go ahead. I'm not seeing that on my chat list though. So go ahead.
Ruth.
Okay, so
okay. All right. Go ahead.
My concern is I don't want to take out too many of these phrases that protect us from lawsuits. So as we go through, and if we say I think that non-compliance with drinking water standards protects us in some ways, as well as the other phrase that was mentioned. So I think there's a balance to be found there, and I think our legal counsel can advise us on that.
We do get more specific later on. This statement is supposed to be a very generalized statement with it doesn't need to have great detail, because something like let me see, if we take this undue costs, that's quite, what does that mean? It's not very specific, and that's fine for this statement not to be that specific. If we just say there's an adverse impact on beneficial users, that's general, and then when we get to undesirable results, we say that would be a non-compliance with drinking water standards, as you'll see as we come on. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay.
All right. Let's go ahead and advance. I want to do a point of order though, just so I'm tracking on things. Nick, the comment that was coming in from Ruth, how were you seeing that? Because I wasn't seeing it, so I didn't want to be rude. So where was that coming through?
Yeah, no worries. That was sent to meeting organizers only. That is something that fell through the cracks as we were setting that up this morning. Just to clarify, to be absolutely sure that everybody's heard who wants to make comments, just go ahead and don't direct that to any individual or any group of people. Just go ahead and shoot it out to every last person in the meeting.
Yeah, yeah, on your, as everybody online, on your chat, it should be a default to everyone, and you should not change that default, please. Thank you. Okay, let's move ahead on then to slide 8, please.
Okay, can do. Dave, I'm going to make you an organizer here as well, just to make sure that doesn't happen again by accident.
All right, thank you.
Okay, next slide, please, Nick, as well. You're very busy tonight. Okay, now we get into the more hardcore of the SMCs, minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. Next slide. And minimum thresholds, so in the best management practices for developing SMCs, DWR has said that degraded groundwater quality minimum thresholds can be defined at either at a site or by well, or by isocontours, which are, it's a line drawn on the map to say this line represents a concentration. So it's like a contour map, but it's for concentration. Or a calculated volume of, you can say in a basin, we will, if you know the volume, you say 100, like 10,000 acre feet. If more than that becomes degraded, it exceeds the minimum threshold. And I'm sure you can appreciate some of these are more difficult than others to quantify. So next slide. And again, minimum threshold is where we don't want to be. You remember that's like you don't want to go below that. Although, next slide, Nick, it's not, with water quality, it's the reverse of a hydrograph or groundwater level. So I've got an example here in this chart. The little dots, one back, please. The little dots that you see there is the water quality and chloride in this case. And it is, there's 2 lines above it. Okay, 2 lines above it. And the minimum threshold is the orange line, and it's actually higher than the measurable objective, because in concentration, the higher the number, the worse it is, right? You don't want these high concentrations, you want low concentrations. With groundwater levels, these 2 lines are flipped, because you want high groundwater elevations, that's the good thing, and low minimum thresholds is the bad. So the colors are also kind of put in there, the green being the good and the orange being not as good. You don't want to be there. And we recommend that we actually set these minimum thresholds at wells. It's much easier to manage. It's very definite that this is a concentration at this point. With isocontours, it's nebulous, and with the volume of water, we don't really have a means to calculate that. Even with the model that we have, that is a flow model. It's not a groundwater quality model. So and it's a lot of uncertainty in the quality model anyway. So I think, I'm not sure if there's anyone in the state who has actually used those other 2 options. It's mostly they're measuring these minimum thresholds at points or wells. Next slide. And so to go on a little bit about those wells that we would use, we need to, and I've talked to you about this before, we'd need to select some representative monitoring points. And in this case, for water quality, we would focus those in the areas where we think projects and management actions are going to happen. But of course, we will also have monitoring networks throughout the basin that are not actually part of the representative monitoring point. So we know what's happening in the rest of the basin. And when we select the representative monitoring points, we need to make sure that we have good representation of all the primary aquifers, and that preferably that those wells are already part of a sampling program. We don't want to add too much more sampling, because the more sampling it is, the more expensive it is. And it would be great to have historical data that we can look at and to see if there are any trends. Have the concentrations been stable? You know, what's happened in the past. And so potential points that we have are, I would say, use all the municipal wells, because these are tested regularly, and I'll talk to you about how regularly those are tested. There are many monitoring wells in the basin, and unfortunately those are really just used for groundwater levels and not so much for groundwater quality. But at least they are points where we could extract groundwater samples. Sometimes if the well's very small in diameter, it's hard to get the equipment in there to do the sampling. So, you know, we have to look at it by a case-by-case basis. Other features you could use are springs or private wells. Private wells, as I explained to you last month, they don't take regular samples. They just, wells that are constructed nowadays, they have to have some testing done just when they're drilled, just after they're drilled and before they get used. So there's no routine sampling on those. Next slide. So other things to consider when we're selecting the representative monitoring points for water quality, and I have already touched on some of these a little. The sampling frequency for some wells is every 3 years, and so this may need to be increased once there are projects and management actions, especially, and plus we have to report annually, and so every 3-year sampling, which is a Division of Drinking Water requirement. They set the schedule for municipal agencies to test their wells. I'll show you a schedule of how wells are sampled in this basin. So monitoring wells, if they are used for water quality monitoring points, we would need to increase. Well, that would cause an increase in the cost of testing for each of the agencies, and that cost would probably need to be added to GSP implementation costs. That's one of the later chapters in the GSP, is where we outline all the costs for implementing the GSP. So that's something that would need to be considered. And then any future project that does get implemented in the basin in an effort to achieve sustainability will always have these strict water quality monitoring requirements that we talked about last month as well. And some of these wells will become representative monitoring points for water quality, and they would have minimum thresholds established and measurable objectives, and they would fall into this network. And so that just tells you we can add points later on as more wells get drilled in the basin and that are useful to for us to manage groundwater quality. Next slide. So there's a bit of a delay here, I'm sorry. Yeah, so this colorful chart, I thought I'd wake us all up now at this point, and this is kind of summarizing all the monitoring frequencies for different well fields, basically. Some of these, the left-hand column is groupings of wells. So in the Santa Margarita, triennial inorganics, it's cations and anions. But you see nitrate is annually for everything. That's because of the potential of nitrate contamination because of the high density of septic systems. That's annual. But others, arsenic triennially in the Santa Margarita. In the Lompico, it's more frequent because it occurs a little bit more there. And so, as you can see, it's all over. The lighter the color, the less frequent it's monitored, and then the darker the color, the more frequent it's monitored. And Scott Valley Water District doesn't, they do sample actually more than required by the state. So they at least, some of these wells could be triennially sampled, but they do it annually or quarterly or 2 times a year, something like that. So it just, and some of this has to do with the treatment systems that they're running. They want to know a little bit more on what the water quality is. And as part of the monitoring plan for this GSP, and if you're going to use these representative monitoring points, we do need to have a more consistent sampling schedule. So I would have to work with agencies to figure out what that monitoring schedule would look like for the GSP. Next slide. I think we have a map coming up here to show you where the points are that we're talking about. There's municipal wells. It's probably kind of hard for you to see there, but the yellow dots that you see there are municipal wells, and there's 14 of them. And these ones I would recommend assigning as representative monitoring points. And then there are some other dots. There are these there's orange ones, which are monitoring wells that I also think we could use as representative monitoring points. And then the other gray, kind of very hard ones to see are other monitoring wells we could possibly use. But again, I'm trying to balance the cost of sampling so many wells and the useful information we would get from that. So, these are the wells that we have available. You see there's a concentration of them in the southern part of the basin where projects and management actions are most likely to be implemented. So we have fairly good coverage there. And then up in Quail Hollow and Olympia, there's less of a chance that projects would happen there because groundwater conditions are fairly stable up there. And so, it looks like, we're really just focused in this one part of the basin, and there is a lot of area up the northern edge of the basin where there's no wells, and that's where private wells are mostly used. It is more difficult to get these wells as part of a monitoring program. There is a potential that we could do it. The county probably might have to go and take samples from people's wells, private people's wells, but to get them to agree for 50 years to be monitoring their well, that might be a bit of a tall order. So and also in that's the areas where there probably won't be projects or management action. And for now, I would just say I would keep the wells kind of where you see them on the map here. Again, we will talk about this in I think the next slide. We're actually going to talk about what you think about what I've told you about these representative monitoring points. But in the end, when we select them and use them in the GSP and say this is our representative monitoring point, we have to explain why we think it should be used as a representative monitoring point and prove that it is representative of the area. So there's quite a lot of technical information that goes into it as well. So I think next slide, Nick, is going to be our discussion slide, and I'll pass it over to Dave.
All right, can everybody hear me? So same method as we have been doing. Go ahead and get yourself in to the queue with a comment. One thing I know that when Georgina and I were chatting yesterday in preparation, so by example, to maybe move conversation or questions along, the table that Georgina showed, there's a cost implication more than likely to a change in monitoring frequency. So or if there's questions you have about that or really anything. So we'll open up the floor. Anybody wish to weigh in at this time? The comment or question? Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, God hates a coward, but you anticipated my question, Dave, which I mean, I understand that the GSA is going to have some sort of an ongoing budget, but it'd be helpful to understand kind of the magnitude of what we might be signing up for with respects to some of this more frequent water quality testing. Can anyone give us an idea? I mean, is it $2 or $2 million per test? To pick a couple of ridiculously extreme endpoints.
Yeah, so if we could go back to slide 13, and as we're doing that, look to maybe member of staff or members of staff who might be able to speak knowledgeably about what that would mean if we were, changing essentially anything that's triennial on here would be going to annual, if not more so, but certainly annual. So does anybody have a sense of implication there of cost? Nope. Okay.
Dave, I'm looking up just what our monthly lab costs are to kind of give us some number that is somewhere hopefully between 2 and 2 million. But give me some time.
Well, if it's between those two, then it'll be on par with the water use projections, right? So.
Well, it depends
John,
on
or Rosemary, do you have any insights while we're waiting to hear from Perrette?
It depends on which ones you want to do. The volatile and synthetic organics are going to be way more expensive than the inorganics. Doing nitrate, we can do nitrate for about, I don't know, $50 a sample, just ballpark. And that's just the lab cost of
Well, so we're talking
all the sample collection that.
We're talking in terms of the constituents that we're dealing with. We're talking the inorganics, the arsenic, manganese, and then the VOCs and synthetics.
Right. So the three, so the four in the middle, so the nitrate, arsenic, iron, and manganese, all included in the suite of inorganic. Maybe arsenic might be added, and then the VOCs as well. And so yeah, there are hundreds of VOCs that get tested, and so that's why the cost is higher. And I haven't provided a cost because I generally don't work with labs on this, but we anticipated this question. Sorry, I should have let Perrette know. I think I was supposed to do that, Dave, and I didn't. Just to see if you guys had any costs. So thankfully, Perrette said a computer and can maybe look that up. But I think there's another question, right?
Yeah, wait, I've got, so Perrette, do you have an answer? Otherwise, I'll go to Ruth and then we can come back to you.
This is Rosemary. Can I make just a comment before we leave this? I don't know off the top of my head what some of these cost. I tend to agree with John that, the ones that we routinely monitor, nitrate, iron, manganese, pretty, regular. So I don't think that's a big deal. The volatile and synthetic organics, like the constituents of emerging concern, there are hundreds of chemicals involved with those. And I would say that when we were doing the CEC, we've done the CEC monitoring, it's at least a couple $1,000s a set of samples. So imagine if you're doing that annually or monthly, we probably spent $20,000 just on CEC sampling in 2016.
To remind everybody, CEC is contaminants of emerging concern or emergent concern.
Constituents of emerging concern. Yes.
Sorry, constituents of emerging concern. Sorry, my bad. That was for Jack.
Just again, to go back to where Jack was asking the question, in this particular case, it means a whole suite of chemicals that come from pharmaceuticals, personal care products, insecticides, medical things, there's a whole range of things, but that's what's in that suite of things.
All right, but in fairness, Jack, I've certainly, since the word constituent is the sensitivity, I've certainly met people of emergent concern many times in my life, and so, you know, little remote meeting levity trying out. Okay, Perrette, were you able to identify some numbers? Otherwise, I'm going to go to Ruth.
So I just pulled 1 month, and because some of ours are quarterly, I don't know which ones are quarterly, but that month was close to 1,000 of just in sampling costs, lab costs. So maybe it gives us some sort of, maybe that was the one where we ran all of them, or maybe it was a partial one. But so it's not in hundreds, it's probably in thousands for all of our wells combined.
Yeah, so it sounds like low thousands.
Per
That doesn't give me too much heartache.
Well, depending who's paying the bill.
All right, let's go to Ruth. Go ahead, please.
Okay, my question was about that map of possible sampling well sites, and I noticed one was way up near the border, up near the headwaters of Bean Creek. Yeah, that guy. And just curious what that's all about.
That's one of Scott Valley's Water District's monitoring wells. The
Oops.
Can you hear me? Oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the Stonewood, Cannon well, I think.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. It's in the Butano though. The Butano outcrops there. It's in the Butano.
All right. Thank you.
But you have to sort of be impressed that Georgina would be able to name by name some of these wells, right? That's, that's,
yeah.
I only have 2 children
hard.
and I can't remember their names. So, all right. Other members of the board in the queue. Any other questions that we have on the RMPs before I open up the floor for the public? Okay. Seeing nothing from the board, we'll go again to the public. At this time, members of the public, please unmute your phone if you have a question or comment. And I'm going to open up the floor. Any questions, comments from the public? All right, hearing none, we are going to advance on. I think this will take us on to slide 16, please.
Okay, now I'm going to be talking about minimum threshold, and what I propose to do is that we use these drinking water standards. We've talked a bit about that already. Municipal and domestic use are primary beneficial uses in the basin, but of course there's also fish. Aquatic life is also a beneficial user. I fished around to try and find some information on what water quality fish require, and it was not readily available. So it looks like we need to do more research, but it's unlikely it's too much. It's very much stricter than drinking water standards. So we're gonna, in all other basins that I've seen, they have used either the agricultural standard or the drinking water standard, whichever applies to the area in which the representative monitoring well is in. Agricultural standards are stricter than drinking water standards, but we don't have that in this basin. So we stick with drinking water standards. That's what Mid-County is using as well. And those drinking water standards are also used by the Central Coast Basin Water Quality Objectives, where they have specific water quality objectives set for different basins, and some are called out because they usually have an issue. This basin is not called out, and so it falls under the all groundwater category, and they say that the objectives that water quality should not exceed state drinking water standards, or primary standards, they actually say. We have talked about, as month someone brought up the question about, you know, if there's stricter standards, would the minimum thresholds change? And yes, they would change to that stricter standard. Or if if there are new constituents that come out of, say, contaminants of emerging concern, if those become get given drinking water standards and they are detected in the basin, those would also be added to the list of wells that or chemical constituents that we would monitor. And we can add them at any time, but definitely at the 5-year review of the GSP, we would add those. Next slide, Nick. So what those minimum thresholds look like are well, I think first I'm going to talk about the constituents to set the minimum thresholds for. There's the typical salinity constituents of total dissolved solids, TDS, or chloride. Then there are also contaminant constituents that are already detected in the basin in public groundwater supply, which is nitrate, MTBE, PCE, PCE. These TCE, PCE things, all these acronyms, these are the volatile organic compounds that have been introduced into the basin by industry. So around Watkins Johnson, gas stations, dry cleaners, things like that. And so we know which wells have had these detections I told you about. They've been detected but not gone over drinking water standards. And then arsenic is another constituent that is naturally occurring, but it may be affected by future PMAs because nitrate concentrations that naturally occur in groundwater can be exacerbated if you introduce other water into the basin. Sometimes that can have a chemical reaction, and so we need to keep an eye out on arsenic. Okay, next slide. And I have to apologize, but my neighbor's a music teacher now. She's playing the piano, and I can hear it's pretty loud, so I hope you can't hear it. Let's see. So these are the drinking water standards for those constituents of concern. These are numbers, milligrams per liter. Most of them are in that, but the VOCs usually very low concentrations. Those are in micrograms per liter, and that's 1,000 times less than milligrams per liter. So these are very low concentrations, but these are being set because anything above that is harmful to human health. So that's what those are. And so those would become the minimum threshold if the board agrees that this is a good way to go. Next slide. Okay, we're going to go straight on to measurable objectives because then I'm going to show you minimum thresholds versus measurable objectives, what those look like on charts in a minute. But if I just can go over again what measurable objectives are, these are the concentrations that reflect what water quality you want to see in the basin. So again, it's not enforceable, but it should be achievable. And so options that you could have is, one, you want to keep groundwater quality the same as it is now in the basin. Two, you want to improve groundwater quality, but you should have a means to doing that. Remember, it should be achievable. And the third one, probably not one you'd want to consider, is allowing groundwater quality to degrade slightly to a concentration that is better than minimum thresholds, but above where you are now. Next slide. So what that looks like on the chart, I'm going to try and show you. Nick, you're going to have to push a few times because it's animated here. I need you to just push. Oh no, not yet. Coming up. So, for example, if you wanted to keep, one back, sorry. If you wanted to keep groundwater quality where it is now, you would probably use an average of the past so many years. Nick, one back, please. That table is what I'm after. In Mid-County, we used 5 years. There was a lot of data collected quarterly in some cases, and so
I think that there's a lag. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the table
Yeah.
that was what was up on the screen. So Nick, if you can go to the next slide, to slide 20. There we go.
So you would use an average, and you would use so 5 years, 10 years, something that would represent the last few samples that you've taken, right? And there is a problem though if that you use if the historic data has only been collected every 3 years, a 5-year average is not going to work very well. You'd need to do a 10-year average or something like that. And then there's also the added complexity if there's an increasing trend. If you use the average from the last few years, 10 years or whatever it is that you choose, then if that trend is increasing and there's no way to stop it, then you can't meet your measurable objective. Anyhow, I'll show you what that looks like on the chart too. So if you wanted to improve groundwater quality, you set your measurable objective at a certain percentile of concentration. Again, it's hard to talk you through that. Again, the slide that's coming up is going to do that. And then allowing water quality to degrade, you could set, in some basins they said, okay, we're going to set the measurable objectives throughout the basin, not even considering historical data. They said 75% of the minimum threshold. So for example, if you go on to the next slide here, this is the chart of nitrate. These are some wells with nitrate concentration historically plotted. And let's see. The the minimum threshold is 10, the orange line that you see at the top. That's what you don't want to get to that. That's a drinking water standard for nitrate as nitrogen. And you don't want to get there. Next, click one. So if you were going to do the last 5 years, you would have that dotted line on the right of the chart. That's where your measurable objective is. That's where you'd like your groundwater quality to be. Next one, if you use, say, the 25th percentile, that would be the concentration representing 25% of the data points falling below, being less than that level. So, this is nitrate. Do we really have a means of achieving that 25th percentile with all the septic systems? Maybe if we took them all out and replaced them with sewer, in 10, 15, 20 years, you might have a chance. So that's kind of unrealistic too. Next one, Nick. And then if you say, okay, we just set it at 50% of the minimum threshold, that would be 5 milligrams per liter. So that's another option. These are the 3 different options that you could possibly have. Next slide is going to give you an example of TDS, total dissolved solids, so this kind of salinity constituents. And this is the same chart I showed you last month, but I actually found more data. And so now we're going to focus on the purple line in the middle there that you see there's actually the increasing trend that is similar to the trend I showed you in that well 9 in the Monterey Formation. And so here's for TDS, the minimum threshold is 1,000 milligrams per liter, the orange line at the top. Next one. If we were to put in the last 5 years, we would be around 300, just below 300 milligrams per liter over there. The 25th percentile, next one, would be...
Which again, for everybody, as a reminder, the 25th percentile, that's just a hypothetical. That and the next one are just hypotheticals for a lot of purposes.
Right, you could choose any, like 75th percentile, you could choose 50th percentile. And the average 5-year, 10-year, 7-year, 8-year, something like that, you could choose. These are just variables in a way. Next slide. Next one, it's going to show you the 50th or 50% of the minimum threshold is going to be at 500 milligrams per liter. And that's what that would look like. So So you see the increasing TDS. This has a little bit of a dilemma as to, one, why is it really happening? And two, what do we do with wells that are increasing like this? How do we set the measurable objective? Right, so a few things to consider. This increase has been happening for a long time, and it probably will continue to happen, and it will be no fault of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, the GSA, but why is it happening? So the next slide, this is in the Lompico Formation, and this is the primary aquifer in the basin. A lot of groundwater is extracted from this aquifer. And so I wondered if the same thing was happening in all the Lompico wells. Are we still waiting, Nick, or did you not? Did you already push one? Okay, there it is. Okay, so these are 4 different wells in the Lompico Formation. The blue line represents groundwater levels, and the orange line is the TDS concentration. So the well 10, the one that was, purple on the previous chart, you see the increasing trend. I mean, obviously, I think, well, it's related to the decline in groundwater levels. And so if you plot groundwater levels, you do see that it's increasing, but it continues to increase even though groundwater levels are stable. And that same kind of pattern happened with the well in the Monterey Formation. Pasatiempo number 7 below it, it also has an increasing concentration about the same rate as well 10, and it's got the decreasing groundwater levels. The top right, it shows well 11A, and that one also has in the beginning of its data some increase, and then it's been fairly stable. And then you see the converse happening with the groundwater levels where it declines and again, and then it's been fairly stable. But, well, 11B, which is only 700 feet away from 11A, screened in the same Lompico, it is showing the orange line you see there is actually declining. So my hypothesis that this concentration increase was related to groundwater levels is not consistent here. So it's hard to say, given the data that we have here, what is truly happening, and maybe we will only know once groundwater levels recover in the basin, and then we see what happens to total dissolved solids. But the good thing is right now, all of these are well below drinking water standards, and so we have time to figure this one out. Next slide.
It's up, Georgina. The table's up.
It is. It's so funny because it doesn't get to me in a while. Okay, so it's because I'm so far away. But you're even further away, so I don't know what that is. So
I'm special.
it's because you have a dog on your lap for some of the time. So in general, what I'm thinking, what I'm proposing for measurable objectives is that we use the average for just about everything. There's one case where we don't use the average. And I'm saying the past 10 years because then we might get 2 to 3 samples to average in that. I don't want to go too much farther back than that, but it will give us something to go for. Again, this is not something that the measurable objective is not something they're going to hold your feet over the fire about, but it's somewhere where as a basin you kind of want to say this is where we would like our groundwater concentrations to be. So the one caveat is it's a TDS and chloride in the Lompico. So because we have that increasing trend, if we use the average, that would be we wouldn't be meeting that measurable objective right away. And until we understand why that increase is happening, I would suggest that we use something like 75% of the minimum threshold, because and that would be 750 milligrams per liter, because there are some wells that are up at about 600 milligrams per liter. So for those few wells that we know are increasing, that's what we would give them, and we can change that at any point to a lower concentration once we have better control over that. You could also decide to keep it really low, and if you go over it, well, you know, you can change it later to be higher. So that's another option. You can decide which way you want to go there. And I'd like to make sure we come back to that when we have our discussion. Okay, next slide.
Okay, so that was a lot. And so Nick, I'll want you sort of at the ready, if you will, to jump around on slides. Same as we have done. I will point out that while we were going into that last section, Perrette did respond, so I hope everybody that is on chat can see it. The note from Perrette was that the Scotts Valley Water District's annual lab services budget was $35,000. So you can look at that number as a place to then extrapolate, as we had already talked about, some additional sampling activities, and I think that it reflects that, to Doug's point, we're not talking multiple other zeros behind that. Going back for a moment, I'm gonna maybe look, Nick, if you can just go one slide back. And certainly we want people to go to anywhere you want in the comments and questions. But again, recall that these recommendations are coming from your consultant. But at the end of the day, as with these and all other decisions you all are going to make, this is where the board really needs to weigh in. As Georgina indicated a couple times here, there's variables of how you can go about making a decision. There is not necessarily a right or wrong. It is reflecting a philosophy of an approach of any particular GSA. So when you look at these recommendations and you think about what some of the other items that Georgina has shown, the question then is, does it seem appropriate? Does it seem reasonable? Are there things you want to ask more questions on? Are there reasons why you might want to deviate from the recommendations that Georgina is offering to you all? So we're going to open up the floor. Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm generally comfortable with the approach based on, you know, the data we've seen so far. But before I could get completely comfortable with it as it relates to all these different constituents, I'd really want to see the data context, at least, or representative data context, so kind of understand where our levels, what these averages would be compared to standards and compared to what might be attainable. But I'm willing to, you know, treat them as a work in progress, an acceptable straw person right now.
So Perrette, I see that you were in the queue, but before we do that, so when you say data context, just so that we can be clear about what that would mean in terms of next information you'd want to look at, do you have a sense? I mean, are you wanting to see a more robust set of sampling records over X number of years? What are you thinking that might look like to better inform you?
Yeah, charts like what we've been looking at, but for more of the different constituents. I don't think we saw necessarily representative data for the VOCs, for example, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So what Dave, if I can jump in, what I plan to do is once I get some direction from the board tonight, I will then be generating those averages and recommend proposed measurable objectives for those representative monitoring points based off data. There'll be a table to say, you know, what the average is over 5 years, 10 years, how many, you know. We can also do the charts, which is good, but most people, there are only some people who will actually look at the charts, but we will do those as well to give you more information. So that kind of will be a packet in it, on its own.
Thanks.
So let me go. I'm sorry, Doug, go ahead.
I was just saying that's completely responsive to my concern.
Okay, all right. Georgina, in a time frame, what is that time frame that you're thinking once we've gotten the feedback from the board this evening? How long is it going to take to start generating the data visualization, if you will?
Oh, we would do it in the next month. So hopefully, I mean, I'd be aiming for the next meeting if it's available.
All right. So the reason I asked that question is that in addition to opening up the floor today, it seems like there may be merit to give board members a few days to think through this further and perhaps make requests via staff to other data that they may want to see, or reiterate what Doug just said, for instance, just that you've got a broader amount of input from the board as to what it is that various members may want to see. So I'm throwing that out as a suggestion. If Paret, if you're comfortable with that, then maybe we could set a date sometime next week, by which point board members could provide that feedback to Nick as to, along the lines of what Doug just said, things that they might want to see in terms of data. I'm not trying to hasten the conversation right now, but just I want to put that out there that people could also weigh in. Is that all right with you, Paret?
With a caveat that I mean, it's a good test to see how many requests we might get and are they conflicting in the content. And so we're gonna have to balance it off. But yeah, so I would say a week. By next Friday, that is April 3rd, if the board members could send to Nick any requests, and then I will help him to go through it and see if that's doable to compile the data considering that input.
Okay, great. Okay, Paret, I believe you were in the queue next, and then John after you.
I think that might be Chris Perry.
Exactly.
I'm sorry. Oh, that's right, Chris, you're there as well. Chris, go ahead, please.
I was just going to basically agree with Doug, and I think that this is a great starting point, and I'd love to see what that looked like on some charts.
Okay. John, Ricker?
Yeah, I had first a question, Georgina, and I can't remember the answer to this, but do we need to have the same criteria for the whole basin, or can it vary by location within the basin or by aquifer in the basin?
It can. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. I actually had that in my notes. So yeah, you can have different criteria, either minimum thresholds or measurable objective approaches in different parts of the basin. Yeah, and they're for different.
It can even vary by RMP, right?
Oh, they will definitely. That is a given. It will vary, except for minimum thresholds. Generally, at certain, a number of them, most of them will have the same, but then there may be some exceptions having different ones, say more strict or something like that. Because one of the things is minimum threshold for nitrate may even need to be set lower, because if it went much, I mean, already at the levels that we're at, we're not meeting the TMDL in the river. So if we allowed it to go higher, well, we'd be blowing that, TMDL really sky high.
You're right, and that's the point I was going to make too about the nitrate. I think we need to look more closely at that. For folks who don't know what a TMDL is, that stands for total maximum daily load. And essentially the state, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and the EPA has set an objective for the San Lorenzo River that's quite a bit lower than where we are at right now. And we're supposed to actually be reducing the sources of nitrate to the river. 80% of the nitrate in the river roughly is coming from the Santa Margarita Basin. So it very much ties into how we manage the basin. Although most of the sources are probably not controllable through the GSP. They're really mostly septic systems. But it is something that we have to be aware of in setting our objectives and our management approaches. And we may even need to get the regional board more involved in some of these discussions, and potentially the city of Santa Cruz since they're sort of the downstream beneficial user that's impacted by the high nitrate levels as well as the fish. These are just, hopefully we can have some more discussions on this in the next couple of weeks and look more at the nitrate issue and how that ties in.
Okay. Georgina, what was that statistic you told me yesterday about the percentage of septic? That this is one of the highest percentages.
Well, the density, yeah, the density is very high.
Okay, we have somebody that just must have unmuted a couple things at the same time because we're getting a bad echo.
Hey, Dave, this is Rosemary.
Yeah, go ahead.
Could I weigh in a couple of things about the water quality? I agree with John, and I just wanted to add a couple of things about the water quality parameters that are really important to fish to sort of fill in. Some of you will recall when we talked about the sort of water policy framework last time, we talked about the Clean Water Act and how each stream in the country that's covered by the Clean Water Act that, since the early 70s has had to have a beneficial use established for it, or at least one, but often more than one. But in the case of the San Lorenzo River, the beneficial use for that river and its tributaries is cold water fishery. That's the driving one. And the big parameters that are in that one with respect to what fish like is dissolved oxygen. They like a lot of that. Nitrogen and phosphorus, not so much. Those are nutrients that aren't good in the system. And then the third one, or the fourth one, is temperature, which is very hard for us to manage in this particular basin, other than by sort of riparian and other kinds of management actions, shading, those kinds of things, in the way that we, create a watershed that functions to maintain the cool water that rearing steelhead and coho salmon in this case need during that summer, the longer summer season. So the nitrogen issue that John raised, as well as the phosphorus, which we don't really have necessarily a big issue in this basin, but the dissolved oxygen and the temperature, these are the characteristics that make fish like a particular stream or not like it.
Okay, thank you, Rosemary. All right, I'm going to check in one last time. Members of the board, any comments or questions before I open the floor for the public? All right, hearing none and seeing none. One last time to the public, unmute your phone at this time if you choose to speak. Any comments or questions from the public? Okay, hearing none, we're going to come back to the remainder of the presentation, which I think is just a couple more slides, really.
Right.
So if you can go ahead and advance this.
Yeah, I went on and put this on because this kind of completes the sustainability management criteria, the kind of rough first discussion that we're having on it.
Let's go one more slide, Nick, if you don't mind.
And another one here. So if you remember, undesirable results are a combination of minimum threshold exceedances, and that are caused by the GSA's activities. And so options that are available is to allow some of the representative monitoring points to exceed minimum thresholds. If you remember, I showed you cases where you can say like 10% can, or, if you have, it's best to say 1% perhaps, a certain number can exceed, and that's okay. But if you exceed more than that, it's an undesirable result. Or else you do not allow any of the representative monitoring points to exceed the minimum threshold. And both of these cases have been used in different basins. And that's all I'm going to tell you, give you options on for that one. And the next slide is the one that's going to prompt us for a discussion. And in discussing this, and when you are thinking about it, think about it in the context of the box that you see at the bottom there, You
Nick,
might
go
see
ahead
it.
and
I
advance
don't
the
see it.
slide, please, if you could. There we go. Thank you.
So the
It's
box
up,
there
Georgina.
says it's coming for me, not yet.
Right.
And I can't remember exactly what it says, but it's something about you need to think about it, consider whether these options would cause locally defined significant unreasonable quality impact to beneficial users and uses. You know, we have that statement, and all of these criteria, you need to always be bringing it back to that statement. And so allowing some of the representative monitoring points to exceed minimum thresholds, does that cause these significant unreasonable impacts, so adverse effects to the beneficial users and uses of the basin? And so when you give your viewpoints of this, just remember to consider that. And we will do this exercise for every single indicator that we go through. You always have to think back to the significant unreasonable statement, because everything needs to kind of depend on the next criteria. I think that in this exercise of going through, well, it's not an exercise, but it's what we're developing these SMCs for water quality, but you see how one thing builds on the next and how it's important to be consistent. Okay, Dave.
Sure. So again, we're going to open up the floor, I think, one last time here. This kind of brings us full circle to something that I'd said at the outset, and Georgina has as well, which is, you know, this is where that locally derived decision comes up. And you've probably heard me say in prior meetings that you could theoretically have identical conditions in two basins in the state, and one basin and one GSA would define it as significant and unreasonable, and another would not. And that's an example of hypothetically or conceptually the local decision making. So looking again at these bullets of, you know, what ultimately pushes you to undesirable, these are the considerations. So any questions or comments that folks have got that want to make at this time?
I have a comment.
Chris, go ahead. Yep. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I think two things. I'd be always interested if the exceeding of a minimum threshold at any of the RMPs was due to a project that we did, as opposed to just natural conditions. So that would affect whether we would allow it to ever exceed, because we can always mitigate if it exceeded occasionally, right? But if it was something that was resulting from a project we were doing, then I think it would be completely different. It'd be more critical. It's like, well, what are we doing? We think we're making things better, and here we are lowering water quality. So I think whether it's naturally occurring or just a change in the basin, or it's a result of what we are doing as a mitigation measure or a project.
Very excellent point. Other thoughts or comments? All right, I do not see any popping up on chat, so I want to make sure. I know we have a couple board members that just called in, so going to check in, make sure any board members that are on the phone that are not having the chat option. Any comments or questions? Okay, we will open up the floor one last time for the public. If you are a member of the public and you've got yourself muted, please unmute yourself at this time. Any comments or questions from the general public? Okay, I believe that this concludes, therefore, section 4 of tonight's agenda. As we advance into the next sections on the agenda, Nick, I'm going to just check in with you really fast. I know that it looks like some people have dropped off as we've been going along. We are still a quorum, correct?
Let me just, if you want to give me about 30 seconds to verify that. I believe that most of the folks who are departing are on the staff side, but just give me about 1 minute if you could.
All right. Just wanted to be sure, because I think there are some remaining items that Chris needs to cover as chairperson, and I would want you to be able to notify or note when quorum was lost, if it's lost.
All right, from a cursory count, and I want to emphasize cursory, I think we still have 10. I'm going to be going through on my side and just trying to figure out who, if anybody dropped off. It could have just been a mistake, but we still have quorum at this time.
Okay. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Chris. I want to thank everybody just on behalf of facilitation staff. Again, this is a new world we're all dealing with here. So thank you everybody for being patient and finding excellent ways to work through this remote meeting process as we all learn together.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Now, we still are going to do the groundwater level portion of the program, right?
Actually, this is it. Oh, go ahead, Perrette.
Yeah, now the water demand and water management first presentation, that was to start leading into the groundwater levels.
Right.
And we decided to postpone anything else that requires more discussion from the board until next board meeting.
Okay, great. Okay, sounds good then. Okay, so that moves us down to staff reports. Legal counsel, Terry Rain, are you with us?
I am. Let me see. Can you see me?
Okay,
camera.
TR.
That works. Well, I'll start talking. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I don't know why my camera's not turning on, but turn on camera. Sorry, guys. Okay, well, I just wanted to give you a quick Brown Act update on the issue that I talked about at the last board meeting. And the question was whether the presence of alternates who are elected officials at a Santa Margarita meeting result in a Brown Act violation of the underlying member agencies. This applies to the Scotts Valley Water District and the San Lorenzo Valley Water District, but not the county, because the county's alternate is not an elected official. So Gina Nichols, who's counsel for San Lorenzo Valley Water District, wanted an AG opinion on that issue. I've drafted a request for an attorney general opinion, and I sent it to Gina and also to Daniel Zazueta, who's county counsel, and he represents the mid-county agency, so he's knowledgeable about the groundwater law. And I've been also working with Bob Bosso on that issue. I have not gotten back any formal responses from them or approval forward. A request for an AG opinion must either come from a county council or from an elected officials at the state legislature level. So we at the district level cannot act independently to to move this process forward. And I think since the county is a member of this agency, the best person to be working with would be the Daniel Zazueta, the new person who's working with Mid-County. So that's the status.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Any questions, comments from the board? Okay, any questions or comments from the general public? Okay, hearing none, I'm assuming, Nick. Administrative, oral, correct? Any administrative report?
Just one quick one, actually maybe two. Later in the agenda, you see the changes that have happened since we met last time in terms of any conferences. Most of them have been just canceled, but some of them already have new dates. So the Aqua Spring Conference is going to happen in July. The dates are there. If you're interested in attending, get in touch with Nick Wallace. And the GSA summit that was scheduled for beginning of June does not have a confirmed new date.
Actually, Brett, I have an update on that.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me then, Sarah, maybe I'll just talk about the other thing and then I'll hand it over to you.
Sure.
So, and the other thing I wanted to let everybody know is we're moving ahead with a grant. Round 3, we did receive a draft agreement from DWR to take a look at, and what they have done, they actually took the existing agreement and making an amendment. So those 2 grants will become one under one agreement that is favorable, or the staff prefers it because it makes it easier to track the dollars. We are working at a pretty tight timeline. The DWR wants it back by April 8th. And then, but it seems to be moving forward, the $640 of grant funds we're almost being eligible for those. So I'll turn it over to Sarah then to give an update on the summit.
Yes, thanks. I was on a planning call yesterday for that because I'm moderating one of the panels, and the new plan is to keep the same dates, but instead it's going to be entirely digital, so it'll be a very different experience. The registration fees are going to be the same as they currently are. So I still think that there's going to be a lot of value. The format's going to be different than originally planned. It'll be more focused on presentation and a little bit less on back and forth than the previous ones, for those of you who attended them were.
Okay. Allow me to point out that your very own Perrette Harmon is intended to be a panelist on the outreach portion.
I saw that.
Excellent. Okay, that's great. Thank you, Sierra. Thank you, Perrette. And thank you, Terry. I don't think I thanked you before. Okay, individual directors' reports. Anyone have anything to report? Individually? Got one? Someone is jumped in. Who is that?
So Ruth Stiles.
Ruth, speak up.
Yeah, I attended a webinar on PFAS chemicals. For anyone who needs a refresher, they are the ones that are darlings of the environmental movement now. They're called the forever chemicals because they're so difficult to remove. And it was really useful. And the main thing I wanted to say is that they are removable with current technology. If we find we've got a lot of them anywhere down the road, particularly in the river. And I've got the whole webinar available for those who want to take a look at it.
Great, thank you. Can we just contact you directly, Ruth?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right, if anyone needs to figure out how to do that, just get with Perrette or to your staff to ask Perrette, and she can make that happen, I'm sure. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, any travel, any training, any meetings, anything coming up for anybody? Okay, hearing none. Board compliance. I know I was planning on doing something at the Aqua convention that I'm not going to be able to do now, so I think I can do it online to get compliant. And sure, anyone else can do the same. Any comments?
Hey, Chris, can I do a shameless, Chris, this is Dave, can I do a shameless plug on something?
Yes, please. Plug away.
All right. Given that folks here have got other responsibilities and organizations they serve other than just this, there is a Groundwater Resources Association webcast on April 8th. If you go to the GRA website, you can see it. That webcast is actually about this kind of method and how to continue to improve remote meeting approaches and skills and planning for remote meetings. Yours truly happens to be the person who will be doing it. So if anybody's interested, whether or not it has to do with Santa Margarita or any other organization you're dealing with, and you're just looking for some primers about how to improve remote meeting methods in this new and who knows how long world, you may want to look into that webcast. It's an hour-long webcast on April 8th, and you can go to the GRA site.
Okay, thank you. Good idea. That'd be great, Dave. Thank you. Okay, see the list of future items there. Questions on that? We have no informational items. And that would take us down to one more thing, item 10. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I'll second, Ruth.
Okay, all those in favor? Do we need a roll call vote?
Aye.
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 Aye, aye.
Aye.
Nice work, Nick.
I think.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good
I'm
job,
just gonna write
everyone.
that down as
Thank you,
unanimous
Nick.
then, if you folks are okay with that.
Yes, that would be great. Yes.
Nick, you're the best.
I know
Well,
this was a heavy
Thank
lift,
you.
and you did great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.